Everyone, I'm back again with a new video for the Stephen Avery case, and I was really thinking hard on what to say after my last video. So, but I felt that before I went ahead with my video, which was going to be the dissection of Brendan Dacey's confession, which is a very layered, confusing labyrinth of contradictions, I felt it is more important to address the this key issue wherein the state has released Teresa Halbach's remains to her family without even knowing whether those belong to Teresa Halbach or not. And why did they do it? Why did they do it? Because there is a very sinister design to it, and that's what I will be going ahead and highlighting, and you will all understand why this has been done and how it materially impacts the Stephen Avery homicide theory put forward by the prosecution. So essentially, what we will be doing is I'm going to go ahead and state certain facts verbatim from the net so that you all understand exactly what is happening, and I will be taking the assistance of certain Reddit columns, public records in order to do so, and then I will be telling you exactly what it shapes out to be, okay, so that you all understand exactly what is happening in this case. So basically, the most recent and relevant motion at the top right now, which has happened in recent times, which is one of the most important development, because there are a lot of developments which are happening in the Stephen Avery case. As you can see in season 2, it was just not the end of it, right? So the state theory is simple. It's Brendan K. Dacey's confession, and how detailed that confession is. He might have contradicted his confession at various places, or he might have been led on, but there are various points within that confession, which means he was involved, and Stephen Avery was the one who actually guided him to go ahead and assist him and also aid in a very heinous act, right? So that is essentially what the state theory is, because there is no DNA evidence which kind of links Brendan Dacey to the crime, and even there is very shoestring DNA evidence to even link Stephen Avery, which we all know, because there is a major cover up which seems to be happening there allegedly. And if you go deep into the case and if you look into the various angles of the case, you will realize that probably framing Stephen Avery wouldn't have been that difficult if you had the right plan and the right people at the right place and the time. Okay, so now what we will be doing is, we are not going to go into conjecture, we are not going to go into like incredible theories and conspiracy theories. We will be just stating a fact. I'm going to just state a fact, and I will tell you how it shows that there is really more than which meets the eye. Okay, so this is in light of the recent and relevant motions, that is the motions regarding Zellner's discovery regarding the state's destruction of biological evidence. And the biological evidence is the unidentified human bone fragments found in the Manitowoc County gravel pit. These human bones were given to Teresa Halbach's family in 2011 for burial or cremation, even though the state admits they were unidentified. Now, you might be thinking, okay, there were some human bone fragments found in the Manitowoc County gravel pit. The county has gone ahead and given it back to the family. What's the big deal about it? After all, they did not belong to the victim. So it's okay, right? No, it's not so. And I will tell you why. And I will be going through all the facts carefully in order to make you all understand how this is a very serious uh, um, thing which the state has done, a very serious, I would say, misdemeanor which the state has done. And this clearly shows that there's some sort of a sinister design behind all of this. Now, worse is, they did not go ahead and alert Avery of their actions, and they withheld reports from Zellner regarding the actions, while lying to her about the status of the said bones. Okay, repeatedly telling her she would be granted access to them for testing, even though you knew the evidence was long gone. Right? So Zellner actually filed a post-conviction motion. The state replied to the Zellner's supplemental motion regarding the Quarry Bones, which was absolutely technical in nature and which had no kind of refuting from their medical experts or anything of that sort. Right? First part of the point, what we are going to do is we are going to look into the expert opinion given by Dehan. Dehan was the fire expert which was hired by Kathleen Zellner in order to discredit the aspects, various aspects within the state's trial theory of Teresa's murder. And Zellner was the fire expert who looked at the crime scene photos in order to ascertain whether the main question, one of the main questions, that Avery's burn pit was the primary burn site. So Dehan's opinion is to the contrary. He says Avery's burn pit cannot be the primary burn site. So I'll tell you a little bit about the state's trial theory. Okay, now what is the state's trial theory? The state's trial theory is a very simple theory. It's that Steve Avery somehow like assaulted Teresa Halbach, took her into his trailer, raped her, killed her, and then called his nephew Brendan Daisy, who also helped him with the act, and he even forced him to also do certain acts on her. And then they went and after killing her, they went and burnt her body whole in the burn in the burn pit, as in the Avery's burn pit, which was near the house. They built a big bonfire and they just burned the body. That is what the state theory is. Okay, without being dismembered. The Kranz has not stated anywhere within the trial theory that Teresa's body was dismembered. They just burnt her when they killed her, and they went ahead and used certain equipment and stuff within the Avery salvage yard, and they burnt her whole. That is the theory. Okay, and that too in the span of 4 hours. Okay, now what Dr. Dehan has to say after seeing the crime scene photos is that he says that the appearance of the bone fragments in this case is consistent with being burnt in a burn barrel and not in an open air pit. So his point is very simple. He says that this is in no way the body was burnt whole in an open air pit, which was in the Avery's backyard. That was not how it was burnt. It must have been burnt in a burn barrel. That's what his theory is. According to Dehan, the state's theory is incorrect in that they argued that fragmentation of the bones to the degree of the ones in the burn pit could occur in under 4 hours. In reality, he states, in order to achieve comparable destruction via burning in an open air pit, you would need massive flames for a whopping 10 to 15 hours, all while constantly stoking and refueling the fire. If such a fire had occurred, there would have been significant thermal damage to Avery's garage and doghouse, and there would have been a significant accumulation of ashes and charcoal. You will see there's a significant absence of ashes and charcoal in the crime scene photos. In addition to lack of time and fuel, Dehan also points to the lack of anatomical continuity of the remains, the absence of more massive bone fragments, and more importantly, the absence of body fluid or pyrolysis products in the soil. Destruction of an adult human body in sustained open air fires fueled by ordinary combustible results in deposits of rendered body fat, charred skin, and bodily fluids that are readily visible or adhering to soil, gravel, or similar substrates beneath the body as burns. Such residues were not detected by scene investigators or by cadaver dogs. The evidence recovered from the Avery burn pit indicates the bone fragments were transferred from another location. Dehan says, using Dehan's affidavit, Zellner has argued that the Avery burn pit could not have been the primary burn site. Okay, now essentially what is Dehan saying? I said a lot of technical stuff, right? What he's essentially saying is that if Avery's burn site was the primary burn site, 4 hours wouldn't have been enough to burn a full body which has not been dismembered. It cannot be enough. You need at least 15 hours, number one. Number two, there would have been a lot of accumulation of ashes, body fat, fluids, smeared here and there, especially with the burn equipment, because if you're going to put a tire and burn it, the flesh is going to cling to that tire, pyrolysis products into soil, but there was a complete absence to it. You just got bone fragments, right? And especially some very clear bone fragments from where you could actually go ahead and identify Teresa Halbach. That is also very interesting, because the only bone fragment which could identify Teresa Halbach was found in the burn pit, and which was a partial DNA evidence, but that was good enough to identify Teresa Halbach. Now, what are the basic things which Dehan is stating? The body was not burnt in the burn pit for the following reasons. I'll tell you the reasons very simply put. Number one, reported lack of anatomical continuity of the remains. Now, if you are going to go ahead and burn a body whole, it will get completely charred, the bones would get charred, burnt, but the anatomical continuity of the remains would remain, because after all it's not been dismembered. Number one, the absence of more massive bone fragments. There were a lot of massive bone fragments. Like for example, if you look at the longest bone in the body, femur, was it present? I don't think so. There were a lot of bone fragments which are quite huge in the human body which were missing. The absence of pyrolytic products in the soil of the purported burn pit. Pyrolytic products are of course the body fluids and the fat, body fat, etc., which cling to the soil even after the body has been completely burnt. That was not present, and that for that also you do not have any kind of structured findings in the medical reports. The absence, this is the most important, the absence of 40 to 60% of the expected skeletal remains of a person of Teresa Halbach size. How do you account for 50% of your skeleton missing when you are actually going ahead and burning a body completely whole? It is impossible. You cannot account for it. That whole body is not going to burn to ashes. And even if it does burn to ashes, the ashes will cling to the soil. It will be there. And it cannot happen within the time period which they are saying. It is impossible. It just can't happen like that. So that is the reason why Dehan has stated that the Avery's burn pit was not the primary burn site. Now, if you say Avery's burn pit is not the primary burn site, then there are only two ways the body could be cremated, and that is it could be either cremated in the burn barrel or it could have been cremated in the burn pit. But the state's theory was very simple. Cran said that Avery burned the whole body in the burn pit behind his house, and then he tried to transfer some bones into the desi burn barrel so that he could distract attention. That was the state theory. So if this point is stated, then it is very clear that Avery's burn pit was not the primary burn site. And even if it was the primary burn site, and I mean to say, even if Avery burnt the body in the burn barrel, still you cannot go ahead and explain the lack of anatomical continuity and about 40 to 50% of the skeleton missing. It just cannot disappear. It can't disappear without any dismemberment. It just can't disappear. And if you dismember the body, where is the blood? Where is the DNA? Where is anything? You've not found anything anywhere in the house or the garage or any place, right? So it is very important to note this point, because this is the first part of the puzzle based on which we will proceed, and we will keep and I'll go ahead and poke holes into the whole jury trial narrative which has actually convicted Stephen Avery. Okay, now during Avery's trial, the jury was aware of only 3 locations from which bones were recovered during the investigation. The jury was made aware of 3 locations. The first location, the human bones in Avery's burn pit, the human bones in the desi burn barrel, the suspected human pelvis misidentified by the state as being located in the Radant quarry. It was not located in the Radant quarry, the human pelvis. It was located in the Manitowic County quarry, it was was later found out. But in the trial, it was stated that the suspected human pelvis was in the Radand quarry. We know now that the state misrepresented that the geographical location of the pelvis. Believe it or not, it was it's actually found in the Manitoba County quarry property, not Radand County quarry property. For whatever reason, the state has yet to acknowledge this. Further, Zellner recently discovered that there were actually four piles of human bone fragments found of the Avery property, not just one pile of possibly human pelvic fragments from the medical reports. These additional piles of quarry bone fragments identified as human by the state's an expert anthropologist in 2006 and confirmed as human by Zellner's expert in 2018 were not mentioned to the jury during Avery's 2007 trial. These four piles of human bone fragments were not at all mentioned. They were not. Okay, now examining the state's misrepresentation and omissions of trial regarding the quarry fragment. In total, there were 6 sites from which human bone fragments were recovered. 6 sites, okay, and Krantz has said there are only 3 sites, with 2 being crucial. The third, the human pelvis, it's not crucial because we don't know whether it's human or animal or anything. That's what he said, right? We know Krantz mentioned the burn pit and the burn barrel evidence at trial, but the issue here is instead of notifying the jury of the 4 additional piles of human bone fragments in the quarry, Krantz mentioned only a single debris pile, the pile with the pelvis, which he himself identified as not evidence because it was only possibly human. Right? This was done because Krantz, intent on discrediting the defense theory, knew it would greatly benefit this case if the jury was kept in the dark about the human bone evidence uncovered in the county quarries. Now, if the jury found out that the additional bone evidence, they might have just begun to view the defense theory of the crime as a reasonable alternative to the prosecution theory. Now, allow me to provide you a quick review of what is the defense trial theory and what is Krantz theory, right? Now, what is a defense trial theory, right? Which Butang and everybody in the season 1 where we saw it was not very clear actually what the defense trial theory was, but I'll just go ahead and state what the defense trial theory was. Shortly after leaving the Avery property on Halloween, so their theory is that Teresa Halbach went there. She had a few words with Stephen Avery, but shortly after leaving the Avery property on Halloween, Teresa was lured to the quarry where she was attacked, murdered, and mutilated by her killer. Quarry as in Manitowoc State County Quarry. The defense argued that post burning the majority of the remains, they were transported to the Avery's burn pit via the Daisy burn barrel. I'm sorry. I believe she was lured to the quarry. They said it was Ratand quarry because they were confused because they were not told about the Manitowoc quarry, so they thought it was the Ratand quarry. Now, the defense argued that post-burning, the majority of the remains were transported to the Avery's burn pit via the Daisy burn barrel. The defense noted that only about 50% of the skeleton was found in the burn pit. Again, they had also that point, suggesting that whoever it was moved the bones from the quarry with the barrel and dumped them in the pit, likely did so in the dark, thus failed to notice how many fragments remained in the quarry barrel after the planting. The defense argued that the pelvic fragment found in the quarry, at that point the prosecution stated it was a Ratand quarry, likely belonged to Teresa. And support for this opinion, the defense cited the testimony of a state witness who told them on cross, although she couldn't determine its origin, she agreed the pelvis was calcined and fragmented to a similar degree as the bones in the Avery burn pit and Daisy burn barrel. And one more important part, the pelvic bone fragment was missing from the skeleton which was found in the Avery burn pit. So there was no duplicate bone. The pelvic bone is a kind of a missing part to the whole skeleton remain of Teresa Halbach. So it was not a duplicate bone which was found from the Avery bone pit, because in Avery bone pit we did not find any pelvic bone fragment. Okay. Now, what is the prosecution trial theory? The prosecution trial theory is that Teresa was lured to the property on Halloween by Avery. After she arrived, she was assaulted and killed in Avery's garage via a gunshot to the head. She was then burnt whole. Remember, she was burnt whole in Avery's burn pit without being dismembered beforehand. Then Krantz made a preposterous argument in an attempt to explain away the bone evidence in the barrel, because there's bone evidence in the barrel, saying that after the burning episode, Avery moved only a small amount of bones from the burn pit to the Daisy burn barrel in an attempt to direct attention away from himself, while leaving the rest of the remains in his own burn pit. So he said if he put something in the burn barrel, Daisy burn barrel, the police will get distracted and think that he didn't burn it. So he'll leave a few bones in the burn pit and he'll put in a few bones in the burn barrel. Therefore, the pelvis was not Teresa's, and regarding the whole story, in the rattan quarry, the pelvis was not Teresa's and would not even be considered as evidence because no one knew its biological origin. That's a very safe way to actually explain away the whole thing. But where did that pelvis bone come from? It just cannot appear from thin air. So, what Krantz claims is that bones of unknown origin are irrelevant. He presumably would agree that all quarry bones determined to be of human origin are indeed relevant to the case and could have been used by the defense, which might explain why the existence of those human fragments was suppressed. Now, Krantz only said that Avery took only a small amount of bones from the burn pit and put them in the burn barrel. Try and understand this. Never once did Krantz suggest to the jury that Avery moved bones from his burn pit and spread them across multiple locations in the neighboring quarry properties. Krantz argued Avery didn't dismember Teresa before the burning episode, but we know that some of the burned bones found in the quarry had cut marks on them, suggesting it had been subjected to mutilation. This means, according to state's trial theory, those human bones in the quarry do not belong to Teresa Halbach. But we know that one highly fragmented human female skeletal has been spread across 6 bone locations. Now, what are those bone fragments? How many locations are there? I will tell you. In Manitowoc County Quarry, there are 3 piles. And the third pile contains the pelvis bone. The rattan quarry is pile 4. There are some bones, and there are finally the Daisy burn barrel, pile 5, and the Stephen Avery burn pit, which is pile 6. Now note this. This is very interesting. In 2011, all human bones from piles 1 to 4, that is Manitowoc County Quarry, pile 1, pile 2, pile 3 containing that pelvis bone which is unidentified, and rattan quarry bones, they have all been given back to the family, stating that yes, you can pay your respects to Teresa Halbach and this can be cremated or buried. Right? Now, the state says we don't know who these bones belong to, so we are giving it to them. How can that be? All these bones have been found in locations contiguous to the murder location. How can you just go ahead and give it to the family without verifying its remains, just because you cannot identify it? Right now, there are a lot of medical advancements happening. And one very interesting point is there, a noted coroner or an anthropologist, if you had given all the bones to him from all these locations, trust me, they could have worked out, or they could have actually reconstructed the skeletal remains of the human body from all the bones which were found out on all the 6 locations. But that was not done. That was not done at all. What they have done is, from these 4 piles where the remains could not be identified via DNA or via any sort of medical evidence, they have gone ahead and simply given that custody to the family, saying that you can dispose this off in any way possible, stating that these are the remains of Teresa Halbach. While in the supplemental report which they have filed to Teresa Halbach, they have stated that they are not sure who these remains belong to. They are not sure. They have given it to FBI. The FBI also says, I cannot say for certain. You cannot say for certain, but if all these bones put together, I mean to say, if you collect all the bones from all these 6 locations and you give it to an anthropologist or anybody and you tell them you kind of reconstruct the skeleton from here, I think they would have got somewhere. They could have matched the bone fragments. It is not the point whether these bones are unidentified. It's the fact that yes, we know of certain bone fragments which belong to Teresa Halbach, and this could have been used to reconstruct the skeletal remains of the human body, which was not done in this case, and which is a serious miss by the Manitoba County Quarry state agencies, which is preposterous. Which is preposterous. I can't believe that this was done. So the bone evidence in the quarry is connected to the bone evidence in the burn pit and the barrel. Even when we add in the 3 additional pints of human fragments not discussed in the trial, that is piles 1, 2, 4, because 3 has been discussed, but it was misplaced in Rattan Quarry. It appears that the state never found any evidence that they were dealing with more than one human female body. They didn't discover any duplicate bones. The lack of duplicate bones and the similarly calcined conditions of bones from different locations strongly suggest that these human remains belong to the same human female. You see, all the bones are unique. Now, if these bones do not belong to one individual, the chances of all the bones being unique are very different. You have not found duplicate bone fragments. So, the bone fragment which you found in the Avery bone pit, you've not found a duplicate bone belonging in that Avery burn pit somewhere else, that is in Manitoba County Quarry, or even in the Rattan Quarry. So, the lack of that, number one, duplicate bone, and the similarly calcined conditions, as in the bone deterioration of this skeletal remain, is based the similarity. It has a similar kind of deterioration which has occurred with the bone remains found in the Avery burn pit and the Daisy burn barrel, right? Now, if we assume that the bones all belong to Teresa, we must assume her bones being found in so many different locations. How can we account for so many different bone locations? How can it be do? It is very apparent that whoever the killer is, she, I don't know who it is, they have gone ahead and killed Teresa Halbach, dismembered her body, burned the body at a very, very high temperature at a secure location, and they have spread the bone fragments around the property and planted the crucial pieces of evidence in the Stephen Avery burn pit, because after all, there he must have built a bonfire for Halloween. They thought that he will not suspect, so they put in some bone fragments there, and also it was transported using the Daisy burn barrel. Now, if that is done, then Stephen Avery is not the killer, right? Because the state theory is that he actually killed Teresa Halbach in his property, and he burnt his body in the burn pit behind his house. Now, if that is not so, if Teresa Halbach was killed somewhere, dismembered and burnt and cremated at a very high temperature, and then her remains were spread across that area, then the whole narrative convicting Stephen Avery falls flat. So it's very important that we look at this crucial bit of evidence, and we have to pursue this. Kathleen Zellner, everybody, all of us have to pursue this and state and show how the state of Wisconsin is going ahead and doing such crafty things in order to obscure the truth. And that is not at all right. We have to immediately go ahead and take some action. We have to protest. We have to tell them that, you look at this evidence. This is crazy. How can this happen? And based on this fact alone, we should immediately Stephen Avery should be given a retrial. No questions asked. Because the state, number one, misrepresented the location of a bone fragment which was located somewhere else. They said it was somewhere else. As per their theory, they are saying it is possibly a biological, it is an animal remain, not a human remain. Then why did you go ahead and give it back to the family for closure? Why did you give these bone fragments back to the family for closure? And why did you do it so selectively? Why did you give back all these 4 piles of bones? which are so crucial, because if you take these bone piles and you go ahead and sink it with the bone fragments found in the Avery burn pit and the Desi burn barrel, you can even easily put two and two together and find out exactly what happens. This amounts to destruction of evidence, nothing else, through a very cleverly designed stake mechanism. And I am really aghast. I couldn't believe it when I actually read about it. I just couldn't believe it. We have to immediately look at this fact, and we have to take some action, because on the face of it only, the state has destroyed important exculpatory of evidence which could have been easily used to understand exactly what happened in this case. So in all probability, what I can see from this case is that someone very close to Stephen Avery has actually committed this crime. This can be inferred from here, because I'll tell you why. If you look at the whole trend, I'm not pointing a finger at anyone, but what I can see is that Teresa Halbach was probably killed on her way home when she left the property. And then after she was killed, I don't know whether it was by accident or something, what happened, but she was killed. Probably the murderer didn't know what to do, so he took her to a place where I'm very sorry I'm saying these things, but I'm just trying to reconstruct the crime, where she was possibly mutilated and then burnt at a very high temperature, okay, which took some time. Then what the murderers did was, in dark, they went ahead and started spreading out the remains at key locations in order to go ahead and distract the police or anybody if the bone fragments were found or not. Eventually going into Stephen Avery's home and planting the evidence there in the burn barrel and also in the burn pit. Now, a person who can actually go inside Stephen Avery's property is someone who needs to be very close to him, because going into the property is a little difficult, because in the Rattan quarry it was a little bit on the adjoining area, so probably depositing the bones there is not that difficult. Manitoba County quarry is also a little unsupervised, but the main thing is Stephen Avery's property, you have to enter the property and then go ahead and plant the bones there. So it seems there's a very strong likelihood that there's someone who's very close to Stephen Avery who has gone ahead and committed this crime, because I still cannot accept the fact that I may have a lot of problems with the Manitoba Police Department, and I may have a lot of issues with them, but I just can't lead to believe that a police will actually go ahead and plant bones and everything in order to actually like build a case against Stephen Avery. Still is very hard to believe it can happen still, because anything can happen, because what happened was Stephen Avery was taken out of his property and that whole place was quarantined and sequestered, and the police started working there. So honestly speaking, lot of things could have happened. There are a lot of ifs and buts, but I don't want to go into a conjecture. But I think the bones were planted quite fairly recently after the killing and the dismemberment and the burning of the body. So because the killer wanted to go ahead and do it as quickly as possible, and he felt that yes, if I could actually go ahead and do it in the burn pit, immediately after that nobody will suspect me, and even Avery wouldn't suspect me, because probably he went ahead and did a bonfire, which he didn't really know that okay, what has been put in the burn pit. So that could be one of the reasons why it was done very swiftly, but maybe in the dark they went ahead and deposited the bone fragments here and there, and which led to this issue. Anyways, signing off. Bye. Good night.